Good morning, everyone. I'm Matt Cannell, and I'm the Executive Director of Sales at VersaPress, a book printing company. I've been a member of the BISG Board since 2022, and with your approval later this meeting, I'll start a second term here in July. I want to first thank everyone for coming to the annual meeting. You're in for a big day today. We'll have members of the BISG Board opening up the meeting with a big reveal of BISG's updated strategy. You'll hear about important developments in rights, supply chain, communications, and the use and updating of BISAC. You'll also hear about BISG's standard for categorizing book content. And then over lunch, you'll get to vote for incoming members of the BISG board, and you'll also approve BISG's budget for the next fiscal year. A highlight of the day will be the presentation of BISG's 3 industry awards, where we'll recognize Phil Leela, Walter Mosley, and Scribd. I know you'll all want to be there for those awards. I know of one person that I'm excited to hear recognized today. The meeting will be closed with a presentation from BISG Executive Director Brian O'Leary, and I'm looking forward to hearing him talk about where the association goes next. But before we start, I'd like to thank the workflow solutions provider Woodwing for their support of this meeting as our breakfast sponsor. They are represented today by Dan Pujalis. He is the Senior Enterprise Sales Executive. Dan, would you stand up and be recognized? We're very excited that Woodwing is partnering with BISG to bring you today's annual meeting, starting with a good breakfast, which I hope everyone was able to come and enjoy. Although Woodwing is a newer member of the Book Industry Study Group, they've been part of the publishing landscape for 2 decades. They joined BISG with a strong interest in our workflow committee, which is all about getting things done as easy and as efficiently as possible. All of that work parallels what Woodwing does. Next month, Woodwing's Rich Cassone will be leading a BISG webinar on future-proofing your publishing workflows. It's scheduled for May 21st, and it's now open for registration online if you'd like to attend. Dan will be here all day, and I'm sure he looks forward to meeting and talking with each and every one of you during the meeting or at the reception. If you miss him, please feel free to reach out at the email address you see on the screen. And when you do, thank him again for breakfast. As I said a few minutes ago, we have a big day planned today. To get us started, members of BISG's board, moderating by outgoing board member and friend, Andrea Fleck-Nisbet, and they are going to talk about a new 3-year strategic plan that we have been working on. So let me invite them to the stage to start the day.
Hello, good morning, publishing friends. Matt, thank you for that kind introduction. I'm glad we can stay friends, even though I'm going to be leaving. As always, it's lovely to be here in these hallowed halls, especially with the elephant in the room, and among so many publishing colleagues and friends. I'm Andrea Fleck-Nisbet, the CEO of the Independent Book Publishers Association and 5-year board member of the Book Industry Study Group. Brian, I'm not actually sure it's in the bylaws that I could stay for 5 years, so thank you for letting me continue on. As the current longest serving member of the BISG board, sometimes I'm not sure if I feel honored or more like the kid who didn't graduate in 4 years. But I can say with confidence that serving on this board has taught me more about what it means to collaborate for the greater good of our industry than any other role in my 20+ publishing career. The business of book publishing is not always an easy or a profitable one, as many of us in this room know, and it is certainly not for the faint of heart. As the inimitable Peter Workman, founder and CEO of Workman Publishing, once said, publishing books is like tilting at windmills. You do it for the joy of it. You do it out of passion. You do it because it is the only thing you want to do. Perhaps it is the only thing you know how to do. And you do it for the challenge. It's difficult, it's demanding, and it requires a kind of mad faith that you will succeed. Like a baseball player, great success for a publisher is getting it right 3 out of 4 times, 4 out of 10, and you're in the realm of legends. And yet, we cannot do this work on our own. We cannot do it individually or as individual organizations, regardless of our size. I suspect, and I hope, that is why many of you are here today, apart from the free lunch and the taxidermy. Given emerging technologies, increasingly shrinking margins, and the global supply chain challenges we face, it's fair to say that it's never been easier to publish a book, and it's never been harder to sell a book. Organizations like BISG exist to create a common ground and a shared global framework, and for all of us who care deeply about the business of publishing good books and putting them into the hands of readers wherever, whenever, and in whatever form they want to have community. Organizations like BISG provide education, information, and connection among publishers, suppliers, and trading partners, regardless of size or market influence. For those of you who don't know, BISG turns 50 in just 2 short years, barely older and absolutely younger than many of us here today. And while the organization has thrived in recent years with Brian at its helm, the board and staff recognized a need to review and update the strategic plans so that this organization can best serve our industry in the coming years and beyond. As someone who is still new to running an association, I have quickly learned that a nonprofit strategic plan is its lifeblood. It's the direction from which the committees, the staff, and key volunteers base their work. It's how we define our budgets and watermark against which we measure our success. Hopefully, it's the reason why you all continue to participate in and advocate for BISG. Today, I'm pleased to be in conversation with Joshua Tallent, Director of Sales and Education at Firebrand Technologies and BISG Board Chair. Welcome. And James Miller, Senior Director of Merchandising Systems at Barnes & Noble and Board Vice Chair. This morning, we will walk you through BISG's updated strategic plan and share how it will inform the future, value, and relevance of this organization. Thank you. Hi, guys.
Hi.
I'm glad we're able to do this. So first, let's talk about the 4 tenets of our strategic plan. And I just wanted to let you know there are handouts on each of your tables if you want to follow along and study as we walk through this. All right, so there are 4 tenets: inclusion, research, standards, and education. And the virtuous circle these values create. So James, let's start with you. Can you tell me a little bit about how we're defining inclusion in this context and why it informs the rest of the virtuous circle?
Yeah, inclusion was part of our strategy before, but we moved it up to the top. And the reason we did that is really there are 2 areas of inclusion that we want to focus on. One, BISG serves all segments really of the publishing industry. Publishers, book manufacturers, distributors, retailers, libraries, industry partners. But there are actually 2 segments that are missing from that: authors and agents, the start really of all of this. And so we want to, over the next 3 years, take a look at how we include authors and agents within BISG and expand our reach to really encompass the entire industry. Beyond that, we also need to work and wanted to extend our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion among BISG membership and among the publishing industry as a whole.
Thank you for that, James. And Joshua, I know this has been important to you as we've been working on the strategic plan to really make sure that inclusion is the starting point for all the work that we do. Can you tell me a little bit about your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think when you're looking at how all the other things we do as an organization, BISG kind of is, it's been said to be like the United Nations of publishing. Unlike a small segment of the organization or small segment of the industry, we can, as an organization, bring all of the segments together and include everybody in the conversation so that we can take things from point A to point B to point C to Z all the way through. The thing is, if you don't have everybody at the table, then it's harder to have a conversation. And as we look at the future of publishing, we know what the challenges are. We all see the challenges every day, but we also don't know the answers to those challenges individually. We have to have more conversation about that, and we have to have more people at the table having that conversation. So that's why inclusion is the first and foremost thing. When you look at a strategic plan, we need to start with everybody at the table so that we can then discuss and engage with the other points.
And I want to move to talk a little bit about research, which is something that historically BISG has done well, but we as a board, when we sat down to look at the strategic plan and what we wanted to prioritize, felt like BISG really needs to be more active in the research space. So Joshua, could you talk a little bit about that and your vision for it?
Yeah, if you look at BISG in the past, 50 years as an organization is a long time. But over that time period, for 35 of those years, we published Book Industry Trends, which was a publication in doing research, right? Helping bring research to the table and say to the rest of the industry, here's what we're seeing. Here are the trends, here are the things that are happening in the industry. When that finally stopped being a publication of BISG years ago, we've now been focusing over the last 5 to 7 years on kind of rebuilding committees, rebuilding the workflow, rebuilding the approach that we take as an organization to help lay a strong foundation. And the time has come again for us to focus more on research, for us to come back to that idea of saying, there's a lot of stuff happening. And nobody, again, this is kind of that inclusion thing, nobody sees every piece of it because we're all focused in our individual day-to-day jobs doing the things that we need to do. So having the organization that is in the center point of all of this, saying to everyone in the industry, here's what we're seeing. Let's do the research, let's figure out what's going on, and let us show you, let us help you see that broader picture, because you're going to see things in that will affect your day-to-day job in a way that you would never have on your own. And that's, I think, when you're thinking about the future of publishing, we have to get back to that idea of doing research to help the entire industry see the big picture.
James, I was wondering if you would talk a little bit, I know this was a priority for you as well, but we were talking a little bit about also the funding of the research and where that comes from. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's nice to say we want to do research, but the reality is BISG has a staff of 2 people currently, and as part of the inclusion, are running over the last 7 years over 200 different webinars that run all the committees that BISG volunteers participate in. There are multiple working groups addressing pressing trends that are challenging the industry. So there's an intense need to do research, but also at the same time to be able to fund that. So we really have to look at how we increase our revenue streams and are able to actually do this research.
By bringing more people from diverse communities into the organization.
Yep.
It's all part of the
Virtuous circle.
virtuous circle. Yeah. So let's talk now about the third piece, which is standards and best practices. And as we sort of move around that circle, we go from research to standards and best practices. It's something BISG has done very effectively over the years, and it's sort of a hallmark of the history of BISG. We're in an inflection point where we want to think forward. So Joshua, can you talk a little bit about where we as a board hope to take the work that we've done and move it into the future?
Yeah, so all of the committees have a standard or multiple standards, best practices, multiple best practices documents that they manage, they maintain, they engage with. And that work is so key. And I should say, thank you to all of you who are on committees, who lead committees, who show up for committees, or just read the notes and and are engaged in some way in that committee work, because that's extremely important for the work of not only BISG, but again, the advancement of the entire industry. So as an organization, standards are obviously something that we care a lot about, but there's always going to be that question of what's the next standard? What's the next thing that we need to make a standard around or build a best practices document around? And that's where the inclusion comes back again. That's where all of us need to be involved in that conversation. But I think the really important thing to remember is that this is an outgrowth of the things that you're doing on a daily basis, right? There's this idea that, what does Brian call it? I can't remember what he calls it. Anyway, there's this ambient noise, I guess, or ambient something, Brian. Basically, there's this, there are things that you're seeing in the background that are happening in your day-to-day job, and you may not even know there's a standard for it, or you may know that there's no standard for it. And if the rest of the industry could get behind a standard, maybe that would help that piece of what we do as an industry be better, right? So this is where BISG can bring more people to the table, more parts of the industry to the table, and we're seeing that happen already in many different ways. I just think it's important for us as an organization to engage with standards, not just as what are we already doing, like BISAC or working through metadata standards and things like that, but also to think about where the future of the standardization can take us. what's the next standard that needs to be adopted, the next standard that needs to be discussed, and who is the best organization or group in order to be able to take that work on.
And I think it's key when we're talking about that, talking about this virtuous circle, is the membership of BISG is participating in committees, it's participating in the working groups, attending the webinars and commenting in the webinars and all of that. And that needs to fund or needs to lead into the research that's done. And then it's that research that says there is a standard that we need. Here's a gap. Or maybe we have the standards that we need and it's more about implementation and best practices. Where isn't he right now? How do we get that off the ground and implemented? You know, and so again, it's all following that all the way through of everyone participating, doing the research, BISG doing the research, and then coming up with those standards and best practices for implementation. Yeah.
And from there, it's not enough just to develop and implement standards. It's also about educating the industry. Such a critical piece is education. And so that's the fourth tenet of the strategic plan, is a real focus on education. I'm going to read something here. So originally we had the goal as serve as an information hub for the book business, and we've changed that to be more active. So now the active piece of education is publicize research and guide adoption of standards and best practices, and foster conversations around emerging issues through all appropriate channels. And I think that really speaks to taking it from BISG being a passive place where people go for education, but bringing the education into the community. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, this was a key piece I wanted to see change. Information hub, like you said, is a bit of a more passive way of approaching this. And so changing this to really actively educating the membership on what research has been done, on what the committees are doing, on what those best practices are, and leveraging the website. A year ago, we were talking about replatforming the website, and we have this wonderful new tool, making sure we're leveraging that in a way that amplifies all the work that's being done currently and makes it available for the membership in a very easy way to access. Just personally, as being on the board, I reach out to Brian all the time about questions that affect Barnes & Noble, and he always comes up with an answer. And I hate to bother him because there's two people on this staff. I know he has a lot of important work to do, but usually I do that after I've tried to research myself and look online and have trouble finding things. And he always has an answer and can point me to another website, can point me to something that BISG has done. And so I think that's the critical piece here of really pulling that information together, making sure that it's available to everyone, and so that everyone can access it.
And I'd also just say that the responsibility of education is not just from, and I say this partially selfishly as an executive director in a role similar to Brian's, it's not just the responsibility of the BISG staff, it's the responsibility of the committees, it's the responsibility of the board, and it's the responsibility of all of us in a room to come together and educate one another. We are a community and we're here to support each other. Joshua, did you have any other thoughts on the education piece you wanted to share?
Yeah, I want to put a fine point on that issue of promoting and pushing out, marketing these ideas. Education is not just about having that passive, information's available on the website, but really it's about saying to everybody, hey, here's the answer you're looking for. Or did you know this is available? Did you know there was an answer to that question? I think a lot of what we're trying to do as a board is to help direct BISG in more of an active, outward-facing educational effort. And part of that involves hiring another staff member to come in and be a marketing person, to take a lot of these ideas that are being developed in the committees and being developed as part of the research, and to put those into practice and to put those out there where people can see them. The website is a great resource and has a lot of great capabilities. And there's even other things that we're in the middle of seeing the staff develop even more on the website. That's a resource that we need to not only just have active and available there, but also to be pointing people to and be able to say, this is the center point of the information, and we're going to tell you about it as often as we can. We're going to make sure everybody knows where to go to get that information.
Thank you, Joshua. So we've talked about sort of the what of the strategic plan, the 4 principles of the strategic plan. And now I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the tactics or the how. So we know what we want to accomplish, we know what we're prioritizing, but we have to determine how are we going to get there. So again, on your sheet, on your tables, you'll see that we have 5 initiatives. And the first one is transforming supply chain communication. BISG at 50, which we'll talk a little bit about. That's a marketing initiative. Resource development, membership growth, and membership retention. So Joshua, I wanted to start with you because I know you're passionate about this subject. Can you talk a little bit about transforming the supply chain and how you envision that?
Yeah, this is probably one of the most important things we've done as an organization in at least the last 10 or 15 years. And I think it's a showcase for where BISG fits in the mode here, in the model, in the industry. We know there are problems, but we don't know what all those problems are. We know that people in the room have ideas for how to fix problems that they're seeing, but they need to be in the room to be able to express those. And so this supply chain communication project, this initiative, is starting out with, let's define what some of the problems are. Let's define what's going on. Let's figure out where the issues are as an organization and as individuals in an organization and as industry representatives. Let's come together and talk about what they are and then figure out what the next step is to actually see a change happen. And you'll notice if you look at that document, you'll see what the next 3 years looks like. What is this initiative actually going to look like over the next 3 years? This is where we need your help, right? We can't do this as an organization without the help of every person in this room. How can you be involved in that? But this is going to be, I think, a center point for as an organization where we show the rest of the industry how important BISG actually is, because we can't make change without actually getting together and talking about it. And BISG is that industry organization that's able to bring together more parts of the supply chain. And this is one of those areas that is most important.
Yeah, and another area that we talk about as a board in the past 5 years that I've been on the board, we've talked repeatedly about there's so much good work that's being done currently inside the organization, but we're not always good at communicating that out in an effective way. And that's part of the BISG at 50 plan. And I was wondering, James, if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a golden opportunity that only comes around once. I think it's really exciting to be able to look back at what BISG has accomplished at the changes of the industry over the past 50 years and to be able to publish that out. But key to that is not just looking back, but looking towards the future and what BISG is tackling, what BISG is going to be doing, and using that 50th anniversary as an opportunity to say, here's what's next, and here's where we're headed, here's where we've come from, and really leverage that as a great marketing opportunity. Hopefully to get some research funding, hopefully to increase the membership, to re-engage with partners who might not be involved with BISG now, but were in the past, and to engage new folks too.
And that also sort of nicely leads into the third initiative, which is resource development, which we all know, as we discussed before, is critical for an organization like this. Again, I work for an organization that has a staff of 7, and I know how challenging it is to answer every member's needs. This BISG is a staff of 2. So there needs to, in order for us to grow and remain a healthy organization, we really need to look at our resources and understand how we can support both the staff and the board and the work that they do.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note, especially when we look at the budget later, that as Joshua mentioned, over the past 7, 8 years, we've been in a stabilization of the finances of the organization. And we're at a point now under Brian's leadership that we are able to invest in another resource. We're able to invest in the growth of the organization, in marketing, in publicizing out the great work that the group is doing that we weren't able to in the past. And so it's a really exciting moment for us right now.
It's all about investing in the future and the growth, which leads to the last 2 pieces, which are dear to my heart, again, as someone who works in an association, which is membership growth and retention. And again, this is not something that's just the responsibility of the board or the staff, it's about all of us together. And so last week we had our annual meeting at IBPA, and I took the opportunity to remind our members, this is your organization. This is not about being passive. It's about you come here because you have value and you have something to share. And so it's incumbent on all of us to work together to make sure that this organization continues to grow and remain healthy over the next 50 years. And so it's something that we all need to work on together.
Yeah. And I think part of that resource development too is we're talking about the research and what can we do to build better research tools, and how can we actually do more research? And some of that's going to involve looking for grants. And you'll see on the initiatives that we're looking at a 501c3 again as an organization so that we can pursue grant money to be able to do that research. This is again where you come in and can help as an organization, help us make the right decisions about which research needs to be done and where to pursue those resources we'll need to make the research happen.
That's great. We're going to have time for Q&A. So if you do have any questions on either the initiatives or the strategy, we'll leave some time at the end of this. But before we get to that, I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of the methodology that the board and the staff utilized in order to come up with this strategy. It's a long process. It's a very labor-intensive process, and it really started over a year ago when we started to talk about needing to do this. So Joshua, I was wondering if you could just talk about that, walk us through that process a little bit.
Yeah, I think the planning is one of the most important things. When you think about making changes like this to a strategy for the organization, we had to come up with a plan and actually execute on a plan. And we couldn't do that alone either. So we actually hired an outside consultant to come in and help us run the conversation. And so one of the things he did was get us all together individually before our board meeting in January and have us meet one-on-one to learn more about the other person and to ask some interview questions that would help us understand what they saw as the potential changes that needed to happen in the strategy. And then with that information, with that back and forth, we were able to come together as a board, and we spent time. This is something I think when I came in as the board chair, one of the things I wanted to make sure we did was not just spend 2 hours every other month or every couple of months having a conversation as a board, but to actually get down to brass tacks and deal with these questions as a board more intimately. So we got together for a full day in January and had a really deep conversation about this. And we're led in that conversation by that outside consultant who has a ton of experience helping organizations deal with these questions and answer the kind of the flow of bringing together a strategy. And it was amazing because we were able to, as a group of board members, really come to a conclusion on where we wanted to see the organization head and really refine the language that you're seeing in these documents. That's a process that took time and it took outside help. And I think that's the same thing when we look at the strategic plan going forward, when we look at the execution of these initiatives, it's going to take the same thing. And we saw that with the supply chain communication group. We used the same consultant for that, and it was also really good. And for those of you in the room that were at that supply chain meeting, I think we all agree that the conversation was deeper because we had a structure around it, because there was a plan in place. And so I think that's going to be the key for us going forward, is to remember that planning takes time and also to have that outside help to help us take these initiatives and move them to the next level.
Thank you for that. So the last piece of all of this, it's great to plan, right? It's great to put together a strategic plan and have initiatives and write everything down and create your KPIs and be excited to do it. But then it actually has to be done. It has to be executed. And that's the hard part. It's also important that we remain accountable as leaders within the organization and as members of this community. So I was wondering, James, if you could talk a little bit about that accountability and transparency piece and how we're going to track this progress.
Yeah, so the last time BISG updated its strategy was in 2016, which is a long time ago. And actually, none of the current board members were part of the board when that work was done. And so on the very end of the document, you see there's a commitment both to look at the accountability as we work over the next 3 years on the strategy, but also to revisit the strategy in 3 years so that we make sure there is some continuity with the board members, but also to make sure that we're being responsive to the needs of the industry. You don't want to do that every year because otherwise you don't really get anything done. You have to have time to execute on these big ideas. But it is important at the same time to make sure that the board and the organization agrees on the direction that it's heading. And I think that was the great thing that Michael Feinstein, the consultant, did was like Joshua said, got everyone individually on the board, gave them an opportunity outside of the group to give their thoughts, give their opinions on where BISG needs to head, and then had a very good structure on how we crystallize that down into the 4 pieces of the virtuous circle that we have today.
Thank
Yeah.
you for that.
And I think as well, the whole point here, it is useful for us as a board to remember that the monitoring is going to be something we do progressively, and that the board changes, right? As of July, we'll have 9 of our 14 board members who have been on the board for a year or less. And that change, that turnover means that as new board members come in, they're going to have new ideas as to how to monitor or what to do. But we, like you said, we don't want to make the changes too often. We want to make sure the strategy is in place and the initiatives are defined. But we also want to make sure that as the new board members come in, they're trained on what it is that we're trying to do, that they can very quickly and easily see what's the mission that we're trying to achieve. And that's for those of you in the room who are going to be on the board next year, the year after that, because I hope some of you will be. We want you to be bought into that as well and to understand that as well. And so part of this as well is, again, educating the rest of the industry and the rest of the membership of what it is we're doing.
Yeah, you make a really good point about sort of the continuity. It's one of the challenges of leadership in organizations like this is you do have turnover, term limits happen and you have people who are terming off and coming on, and getting people on board and understanding what the mission, vision, values, and priorities of the organization are is not always easy if you don't have a plan like this. So it's important to have it for that consistency across the organization. It's also something that, we've put together this plan, we spent a lot of time on it, but again, this is your organization. And so we want to hear from you in terms of not only what we've put forward, but also what your ideas and thoughts are and where you want to see us prioritize things, because it is for all of us to work on together. So with that, we're going to open the room up to questions, but did either of you have anything else you wanted to mention before we open it up? All right, I know there are some mics out there. Hopefully some of you have some thoughts and ideas.
And we are streaming this, so please use a mic when you're asking the question so people online can hear.
I know it's early, don't be shy. I know there's a question.
Hi, thank you. Quick question. When you talk about inclusion initially, you mentioned that 2 groups that aren't part of the organization yet, but haven't been members in the meetings, are agents and authors. Could you talk a little bit more about your outreach plan for bringing agents and authors to the BISG?
I'm going to defer to Brian to talk about the specifics there. I don't know, Brian, if you want to touch on that now.
Thank you for that question, Bea. Part of our issue with attracting individuals, really, authors and agents, is the pricing structure for the organization. So the first step is to evaluate what it looks like and how those people could be brought in. The second piece is actually to then figure out whether or not we're better off partnering, for example, with IBPA or with AALA, as an example, to have representation, make sure that their voices are included. So maybe it's an organization becomes a member of BISG, and then their members become, by extension, eligible for committee work. So we have to be sensible, and we also want to make sure that we do it in partnership with the industry.
I would just also add to that standards and research, often we think about standards and research as it relates to our production or our downstream work, but we don't often think about it as it relates to the upstream work, the acquisition process. And I think it's really important for us as an organization, or as an industry rather, to have that sort of continuity across the life cycle of book publishing. It's something we've never really done well as an industry. Everyone has their different processes and ways of doing things. And I think if we can invite people from a more upstream perspective at the acquisition process to be part of these conversations, then we'll be more successful creating consistency across the life cycle of a book. Yes. Bridget?
Good morning. Would you mind saying a word about how one might join a committee of AISG? Because it's amazingly simple and we want all of you to be joining us.
Email info@bisg.org, or just go talk to Brooke and say, hey, I want to be on this committee. There you go. Quick and easy. Over here.
Good morning. It didn't sound like it. Now it is. Hi, Rebecca Burgoyne, United Methodist Publishing House. Thinking about committees, will this new strategy affect the committee structure as well? Work through the existing committee structure, or that's not known yet?
So if you look at the initiatives and the kind of the tactics over the next couple of years, there's no change to the committees that we have. The 5 committees are going to stay the 5 committees we have. There's a lot of working groups though as well. And I'm sure other working groups will come out as a result of this, this work that's being done in these different areas. So be on the lookout for that. And if you're in a committee, you probably know what you're already working on when it comes to, you know, the plans and the strategies that you're working through. You're working on best practices documents or updating other resources. So we don't foresee a new committee coming as part of this, but who knows? I mean, part of that might happen next year, the year after. It's determined that something needs to be done. There's an AI working group right now, right? There's other working groups that will pop up. It may be that a new committee is necessary, but we will definitely as an organization be communicating that.
Any other questions? I can't see that side of the room. Sorry, folks.
So glad you're all bought into this new strategy.
I know.
That's so great.
I know.
Thank you so much. Actually, seriously, there's a lot of work to do, right? We're not done as an industry. We're not going anywhere. We're gonna make progress as an industry if we can engage each other more effectively. And so I think the strategies that we're building here as an organization are going to hopefully help move the industry in that direction. One question up here.
Thanks. In terms of the different committees, how do they know when they've achieved a goal? And that's the thing. There's lots of committees, and we're involved in a lot, and have team members there. But how do they know when they've actually achieved something and when they've delivered something? Because it feels like some of the committees go on, and there's lots of meetings, but they don't cross a line. And so how can we better define, the purpose of each committee and give them goals to achieve so that they can go, okay, we've done this, and then they can move on to the next.
So every committee has every year a strategic plan of its own, essentially, and that's a plan of what the committee is trying to achieve that year. That's reviewed by the board and approved by the board as well. So if you are on a committee and you want to hear more about what that is or see a copy of that, it's actually on the committee charter is on the website. You can see that charter and see what the plan is and where things are going. You can always ask as well, and Brooke, I'm sure, can give you a copy or help you understand. But there's a good point that we need to make sure that everyone in the committee, because we have a lot of people who are signed up for committees and don't show up, right? There's only, I think, 125 people who are active in committees, but about 500 people who are signed up for committees. So there's a lot of people potentially who don't know what the real work is being done or what's happening or those kinds of things. So again, part of this might be a marketing thing for us to, as an organization, be better at explaining and promoting what the committees are working on and showing those successes and being able to celebrate them together and say, we just published this document. We just got this, best practices guide updated. Let's make a bigger deal about that. Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah.
And I know we're doing more work to communicate across committees. I think it's very common in an association where the work becomes very siloed in the committee, and sometimes you have no idea what the other committees are working on. But I know that Brooke and Brian are working on that to make sure that all the committees are communicating with each other and know what each other's key initiatives are.
And the committee chairs are really good at that too.
Yeah.
They'll call each other up out of the blue and talk about things that they're seeing some relationship, and they bring things together. I think that's extremely important.
And just to underline the education piece, because I'm always amazed at what is happening within the organization, but it's because of the position I'm in that I'm hearing that. And so making sure that we have the marketing and the education and are leveraging the website in a way that is publishing all this information out.
Yeah.
Right.
I think we're getting the nod.
Are we getting the nod? All right. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful day.